Welcome back to our building block series. I'm Cindy Cloward, and today I'm going to show you how to create the apple pie quilt block. Now my block is done all in pinks. It probably should be called the cherry pie quilt block, but it's traditionally known as the apple pie quilt block. And this is what it looks like in our sampler quilt. It looks a little more complicated, but it's easier than you think to create. These are the supplies you'll need to get you started. So the first thing you're going to do is take your small squares and you're going to grab your marking tool. I like a mechanical pencil and your ruler lined up, and you're going to make a diagonal line from corner to corner. So you line that up just like this. Press down a little bit so it doesn't shift, and mark corner to corner. I previously marked the rest of my squares. Then you're going to grab your 2 cranberry pieces. This is our confetti cotton solids. They're wonderful to work with. And now I'm going to show you how to create 8 flying geese units in a no-waste method, meaning you're not going to have extra fabric at the end. It's pretty slick. Let me show you how easy it is to do. So you take these small squares, and they are going to cross a little bit right in the middle. But you're going to line that up so that the last one you put in overlaps the bottom one. Line that up on both of your squares, your cranberry piece on the bottom. So take a look at that. Now I give it just a quick press. And what that does, it just kind of makes the fabric stick together a little bit. It's easier to sew if you give a quick press like that. And then sometimes I add a pin just for safety to keep them in place. You don't have to do that step if you're comfortable just taking it to the machine and sewing. But if you're worried about your blocks shifting, just throw a couple pins on each of the squares. So now take a look at this. This is all ready to take to the machine. You're going to chain piece these 2 units together, and this is not going to be your stitch line. That's going to be your guide, and you're going to sew a 1/4 inch on each side of that. So I'm going to take to the machine, sew 1/4 inch on both, turn around, and sew a 1/4 inch on the other side. Let's go sew. Okay, you've sewn down both sides. Take a look. Now, it's really important to have an accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance. And in fact, on this, I do a scant less than a 1/4 inch seam allowance. It's hard to get it perfectly on, so it's better to be slightly smaller than that. You don't want to do slightly bigger on these flying geese. So we're going to clip those 2 threads that are connecting them, and now this is going to be your center marked line is going to be your cut line. So right down the center, you are cutting on that marked line. Okay, so you've got these 4 sections. Now I always give a press, kind of set your seams, as they say, before I flip them out. It's just good to get everything nice and pressed, and it helps your blocks, your units come together much better when you take that extra step. Now you're going to flip the 2 light pieces up like this. So almost is going to look like a heart. So this is what it's going to look like. You're going to flip that up just like that. Put my quilter's clapper on top of that as it's cooling. Oh, pull it up a little. I'm going to just add a little mist to that. A lot of times when you lift it up, you just want to push that up like this, so you make sure that the fabric's pulled all the way up. Okay, let that cool down. Okay, let's bring it back. Look at all these kind of wonky hearts a little bit. Now the next step you're going to do is take your small square, and again you're going to line it up in that corner. It's going to come off the end. I do bring it back and press that on, and you can add a pin to it as well. So you line that up on all four, and then I'm going to grab my pins too. So that's lined up just like that. I think, again, it just, when you press it before you sew, it just kind of makes the two fabrics go together so much easier. Okay, let's take it to the machine, and we are going to sew, not on the center line, a 1/4 inch on each side. And again, like I mentioned, just like a scant less than a 1/4 inch. So this one's a little more tricky to chain piece. So if you just do one unit at a time, that's fine too. With the points, it might be easier to do one at a time if you're a new quilter. But I've chain pieced these together, and I'm just going to snip the threads in between. And so let's take a look. We have our 1/4 inch on each side. Now I'm going to cut down that center on the mark line, and then I'm going to take it to the pressing station and press my flying geese open. Okay, I just kind of press, set my seams, and then I open it up like that. And you have just finished, or you're in the process of finishing, 8 flying geese, just like that. Okay, while those are just cooling off, I'm going to grab a rotating mat. Love these ones by Daley. And then I'm going to grab a 4.5 inch square up ruler. And I'm going to show you how to square up your flying geese. Now what you want is a 1/4 inch from your tip, your point, to the edge of your fabric. And you can kind of see that it's not lined up perfectly. We do our best. That's why I have a lot of tools to get everything lined up before the next step. So I'm going to show you how this works. So the width of the block is 4.5 inches unfinished, and it's 2.25 or 2.5 inches the width of it, or the length. Width, length, you know what I mean. So I line it up like this, and you see this is the part that's going to be taken up into the seam. So you don't want your point to go into the seam allowance. So you don't want to trim that off so that is eaten up in your seam, because you want a nice point on your block. So I'm going to trim it up, and this is the slickest thing to do to trim up your blocks. So I can see my point is not in the blue area. You've got and there is your flying geese unit ready for the next step. I'm going to repeat that 7 other times, and then I'm going to show you how to create the next section of the block. Okay, that's our last flying geese. Isn't that a great method? That saves you so much time. And it's a great way to create a lot of flying geese in a hurry. So we've got all our flying geese ready to go. The next thing we need to do is take our 2 long sections of fabric and strip piece them together. Now it's really important, again, to have an accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance, and that you don't get a little wobbly as you've got this long section to sew. So just be mindful of when you're sewing this together. So let's take it to the machine. If it's helpful to you, you can add pins top, bottom, in the middle to keep your fabric from shifting. So let's take it to the machine and sew. So I've sewn down that length, and I do recommend when you're strip piecing long lengths that you use a 1/4 inch foot with the seam guide, because that metal guide really is helpful. So that's what I recommend. I'm going to give this a quick press. Again, I just setting my seam before I open it up. Now open that up to the dark side. Press to the dark side. I just kind of open it up like that. Okay, once you've got that pressed, that entire length of fabric, you are going to get your 4.5 inch square up ruler. So you make sure you've got a square end on this end. That looks good. You're going to have just a little bit extra. And a reminder, if you are a little short on both ends, try using a scant 1/4 inch, and it should be perfect. So these blocks are all lined up 4.5 inches. So I'm going to put this over here. The next thing we need to do before we assemble our blocks, take our flying geese units like this, and we're going to sew 2 together. So we're going to line them up like that, flip right sides together again, so it's going to be lined up like that, and put a couple pins in both ends. Okay, let's take it in the machine and sew. Okay, we've got our 4 units sewn together. Now open them up and take a look. What you want is that point just at the bottom of the other flying geese, and you want to make sure that point has not been sewn into the seam, and that's just perfect. So check them all, and they all look good. So they're ready to take to your pressing station. Okay, I'm going to get my rotating mat out and square these up. Again, it's so nice. You can line that center mark up. See if there's anything that needs to be trimmed off. Not much there. Okay, now it's time to assemble our block. And we previously just have our pink 4.5 inch square, our strip piece units, and then our flying geese. And just like we've done our previous blocks, we're going to flip over the center units to the outside, pin on top. Let's take it to the machine. Okay, let's take a look. Looks good. Let's take it to our pressing station and give it a final press. Okay, the last thing we need to do is square up our block. So you get your 12.5 inch square up ruler. You can lay it down just like that. Again, you can see all the intersections, your seams. See if it all lines up. There's just a few threads to trim. This is a block. You need to be particularly careful not to cut into your flying geese. So you really don't want to trim much. I'm just going to trim off a few of the threads. And your apple pie block is finished. Congratulations! Join us next time for the checkerboard star quilt block.